I want to tell you a little bit about the outside of the cabin, and then Jennifer's going to tell you about the inside. The outside of this building, it was discovered at the old rock quarry out northwest of town. Decision was made to dismantle it and put it somewhere. They had no idea where they was going to put it, but we was going to dismantle it. So we went out there on Labor Day, 1974. I have got a major experience with it because I had taken wood blocks to put on each log and number them. And there was some people there that said I couldn't do that. They were going to staple it with 3x5 cards and mark it. We done that. Dismantled it. We took it down to the Herb Carter farm. He had a machine shed down there. We stored it in that machine shed, covered it up with OD Army tarps for the winter because the machine shed was open, didn't want moisture blowing in on it and so forth. While we was doing that, the decision was made to put it where it's at today. The Chamber of Commerce and Historical Society owned the house that faced across faced south here in front, and we commandeered the alley. So the front yard there, the 15 feet from the curb is the alley. As you can see, the power lines going through. But anyhow, long story short, we got the foundation in. We went out to get the logs, and the mice had ate up the 3x5 cards. And there's no doubt I forgot my Sunday school lesson. And we brought it in, and the front of this building faced south. So we had to turn it 180 degrees and no numbers on the logs. So anyhow, I was threatened bodily harm by the crew. If I ever said anything more about a log cabin, they was done. So anyhow, this was hewed out in 1835. Van Buren County had been in 1835. So basically these people probably were squatters where they had built this cabin. It was an isolated spot, but when you think things through, no doubt it was located there because of water supply. Because of the quarry now has ruined the springs that was out there. I shouldn't say it that way. They mined the rock to where the water's not there to run the springs. Anyhow, there was a caravan of those people came here from Virginia. It took them a year to get here. Ox carts, wagons. Imagine there was no Quick Trips, no Motel 6, no Home Depots. So they had to think things through, and they bring the necessary tools to build this cabin. This cabin is a unique thing in the way that it's interlocked at the corners. I am amazed at the workmanship that those people had with a hand axe and a crosscut saw. You will see that it's interlocking in such a way that when we was trying to sort the logs out and get it 180 degrees, the interlocking is what helped us get it right. Because if you laid a log up and it didn't interlock, boy, it wasn't working right. So anyhow, that was it. We tried to build it as historically correct as we could. The brick came from an abandoned house that was north of what is known as the B&H freight lines out here on the hill, and now show me truck lines. Boys from the National Guard salvaged that brick for us. We wanted to use Winterset fieldstone for the stone on the back side, which is the front side. Well, anyhow, on the other side of the building. And we was able to locate that over north of Midway School. And the crew went over there and picked up stone and brought that in. So that gives you a little bit of the history of the authenticness of it. The sandstone sidewalk was picked up in front of some buildings that had sandstone sidewalk here in Harrisonville?
It was built in 1835 by Samuel Sharp, and he and his wife Frances came here from Virginia, and they traveled by wagon, they traveled by steamship, they traveled by horse. They had horses with them. So they made that trek from Virginia over here to Cass County, which was Van Buren at the time. And they had 3 kids under the age of 5, and she was pregnant with another. So imagine that kind of a journey with little kids. But they all made it here. It wasn't an Oregon Trail experience for any of them. They all made it here. And some of Samuel's wife, her name was Frances, some of her family had already settled here. And they are the ones that wrote back to Samuel and said, hey, this is going to be great. Come out here. We can get great land out here and really make a good living. So he came out, although he came out not as a farmer as far as making his living as a farmer. He was a very educated man, and he was actually a notary. He also came out with a lot of capital, a lot of money, and he became what was known as a usury, which is basically the same thing, what we call a banker today. So he was basically the first banker here in this area. So as other people arrived and needed, to borrow money to buy seed or buy animals or buy, equipment or, things like that, they came to him, borrowed money, and then he made money from the interest on those kind of things. In fact, when he passed away, his wife was so adamant about taking care of her young family, because she still had some young kids at home, that she made the unusual act of, as a woman, going out and calling in those loans. There's actual court cases of her calling in loans that were not repaid, so she could make sure her family was going to be secured. So one of the things that shows just how wealthy he was is that we have a 2-room cabin. Most of the cabins that were built on the frontier were just a 1-room cabin. Anybody want to hazard a guess as to how many people lived in these 2 rooms at one point? 13. 11 kids and 2 adults. Okay? So we think about our homes now, we want every kid to have their own bedroom. That was not the case back then. So it would have been set up like this, where there would have been a sleeping quarters area. And this bed is actually from a family member related to Frances, the wife. And it did come from Virginia on a wagon. So it's a really cool object that we have that's time period correct. I also like to point out the quilt donated by the Log Cabin Quilters. That quilt is a little over 100 years old. And that pattern is one that was would have been utilized during that time frame too. So it's also time period authentic. They would have had trundle beds underneath for the younger kids. They had cradles where the older kids would have slept. So this roof was put on here in an effort to make this last longer. This is not obviously an authentic roof. And it would have been up a little higher. And so there would have been more room in the loft area, and that would have been sleeping quarters for the older kids who could navigate ladders. So that's how you could manage to have 13 sleeping bodies in one space. They also, if you will notice, there is no bathroom in this. They would have had an outhouse. And sometimes it wasn't always prudent to go to the outhouse in the middle of the night. So you'll notice the indoor potty down there. My uncle always referred to them as thunder pots, but they're also called chamber pots. But that is what, if it was too cold or too snowy or too rainy and there was an emergency in the night, that's what was used. And then the little kids in the morning, 8, 9-year-old kids, that was their job to empty that. So it always got, what they say about it, it always runs downhill. So And then behind Jennifer over there is a wash stand. That would have been where hygiene was done on a daily basis to wash the face, the neck, the upper body, that kind of thing. And if the men shaved, there would have been a mirror there, and that's what they would have utilized. Water that was brought into the cabin had to be hauled into the cabin using buckets, because there was no running water anywhere. So there was a well that was on the property that they would have hauled buckets out of. They did, I don't know how many of you have read Little House on the Prairie as a kid? Yeah, that whole thing about taking a bath once a week, because it was so hard to get that much water into one space, you only did it once a week. And opposite of today, where we let little kids do everything first, back then it was the opposite. The adults took the first baths, and then you went down the line. And so by the time you got to the last kid, it was probably not very clean and not very warm. So being the youngest didn't have the benefits that it has today. I'm the oldest of three, so I have a little bit of angst against the youngest getting spoiled.
Hear, hear.
On the mantle here, and you'll see pictures over there on the wall. This is actually a picture. Over there is Matt and Julia. Matt was Samuel's son. He was the first child born in the cabin. He ended up living here with his family. Him and Julia lived here during the Civil War. Julia did die in childbirth. Matt married the lady that's in the other picture over the wash basin. That is Mary. Mary and Matt never had any children, but she did help him raise his family. So, any questions in this room? If not, we'll head to the next room.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said they built a well when they got here.
They would have dug a well.
Primitive times then.
Yes.
How did they dig a well that deeply in this Cass County clay?
Yeah. So they were also in an area, and John talked a little bit about it, where there were natural springs over there. So the water level probably wasn't as deep as in some places. But it was all dug by hand and bucketed out, and yeah, it's not an easy process. I mean, it's still not an easy process to dig a well if you've ever had to do that on any property. And we have all this modern technology, so you can only imagine how difficult that was.
Thank you.
They did do all their cooking over an open fire, which was a major hazard for women of the day. If you think back to what the attire was on women, they had long sleeves, they had long dresses, and so catching fire was a real hazard. So that arm that swings in and out over the fire was there to help them stay a little bit more safe as they were doing their daily activities. They would have used, cast iron's been around for a very long time. This is something they would have used to cook with. I told you about where the stovepipe was. You see where it's charred some of the logs there when they put wood stoves in. You'll notice a spinning wheel right there. That is something that's representative. It's not original, but it's representative of something that Frances Sharp brought with her from Virginia, because there weren't Cato's to go to and buy clothes from. They had to make all of their own textiles to even make their clothing. So they would have utilized the wool from sheep, spun it out into yarn, made their own socks and scarves and all kinds of stuff. And then they had a loom that they would have woven fabric on to actually make your clothing. On the wall over here next to the rake, you'll notice one of the very first, I don't want to call it a vacuum cleaner, but that's kind of what it did. Yeah, that's kind of how they got out their angst. They used that. That was they pull their rugs out, put them over either a line or a rail or something, and then just beat the tar out and get the dust out. Then you've got one of our early washing machines right there. Washing was only done once a week, back-breaking work. Luckily, they didn't have a ton of clothing that they utilized. Typically, they'd have only one or two work shirts, and then they would have one nice pair of clothing to wear to special events like churches, weddings, things like that, dances. So there wasn't the kind of stuffed closets like we have today. There you go. It's a candle mold. So it's how they would have made their own candles. I also like to point out these fun little irons. Okay, this is not light. This is pretty heavy. I mean, it's sturdy. Then I also like to point this one out. Anybody know what this is for?
Potatoes.
Ruffles.
Yep. So to get the crinkles in the sleeves or the collars, this is what they would do. So think of what curling iron does to your hair. This would have done that to the fabric, like the fabric crimper. I think I know we're running close on time, so I don't want to belabor the point, but anybody have any questions? I'm welcome to take those.
Is it brick or was it rock back then?
They did, okay, so one of the earlier settlers that was already here was R.A. Brown. R.A. Brown was, I don't know if anybody is familiar with the Brown House out off of Prettyman Road. He was one of the most wealthy men in the county. He was also the largest slaveholder. So there is, the legend goes, I haven't found any documentation on this, but the legend goes that the property where this was located was adjacent to Brown's property. And so they believe they had slave labor that fired the original bricks. Again, the original bricks were long gone by the time we got the cabin. Like John said, these are salvaged bricks that were then put in here. But that's, they were fired on the property or close to the property.
And the chalk was in the cracks of that board. I wondered how much of that chalk my mother might have rubbed in them. And I wrote on that. So, anyhow, you have emotions when you do things like that. I was amazed at the quality of material that was in the building. And I think, well, I'm going to stick with my story. I think this is Wisconsin white pine. I think it was probably cut in the early 80s, 1880s, probably floated down the Mississippi, sawed up at St. Louis. Railroads had been established from St. Louis to Kansas City by then, probably came in on rail, and then it had to be brought down by a wagon and a team or oxen or something to get to the Harrisonville. Now this was a rafter tail that I salvaged. There was a custodian here come and said they'd flown into the Twin Towers. We may have to re-up. That didn't go well with my line of thinking. 8 years was enough. But when we got permission to do this, the community interest was unbelievably good. We raised $145,000 in cash and in-kind products. When we got done, we had $17,500 we could leave in the public school foundation for maintenance. So it's what you see today is a spin-off of what the community done. The desk you're sitting at, you will notice most of them were carved on. All country boys carry pocket knives. 1917 certificate. My uncle, he was a graduate of Brush College School. He was our first college graduate, but it took him 5 years to get through it. Because as a 13-year-old, he had to start cutting wood for the big yellow house, or it used to be yellow, that's on Mechanic Street, that was owned by the landlord. And he grew up on the same landlord farm that I grew up on. So anyhow, they kept it in the family. We tenant farmers and shore carvers and had no money. I want to show you another picture or two, if I might. And of course, I didn't write down the book, I didn't highlight it, so consequently, I don't know where I read that. But I would like to know about that again. Here is some of the nails we salvaged out of the building. And this building was 1886. Now, in 1855, the leadership of this county knew that we had to get education going. So they appointed a county superintendent of schools in 1855. The county would have been only about 18 years old. So everybody knew everybody had to be taught something. So this district was in the west part of the county. Part of the district was in Grand River Township, part of it was in Dolan Township, and a little bit of it was in Peculiar Township. Now that's kind of useless information until 1957, when they closed the school down and consolidated Grand River Township with the Harrisonville school system, with the Dolan Township, what is now Midway, but at that time was Freeman, and then Peculiar. So I came to Harrisonville. I happened to be in Grand River Township. So when I graduated from here in 49, I bummed a ride to high school for 4 years, and bummed a ride home for 4 years. I could always beat the school bus because the school bus was about an hour and a half, hour and 45-minute route. So anyhow, that's useless information in one way, but in another way, it's kind of interesting. When I got word in '99 that this building was going to be destroyed, and the owner lived in Arizona, and I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I waited a day to clock before I called them. Come to find out that they're an hour earlier, or well, anyhow, there's an hour difference between, and they don't do daylight savings time. So when you call somebody out of bed at 6 o'clock in the morning and you want a gift, that's not the brightest thing in the world to do. But anyhow, after about an hour and a half discussion, she agreed that I could have the building if I could get it removed from the site in 45 days. And of course, the first impulse is to try and move it with a house mover. And you find out that you got 3 telephone companies that you got to work with, and you got 3 or 4 different utility power line companies, and it just wasn't going to work. But I wasted about 20 days finding out I couldn't do it. And then I took a crew out and we started dismantling it. The dismantling of it was one filthy job. There was about, on this wood ceiling, and by the way, the lining of this, very little of this is any original wood because of the lead paint issue. You got to be politically correct on all this stuff. So anyhow, when we took the ceiling down, there was about 3/8 of an inch of dust in the ceiling. And in that ceiling dust was a layer of red dust that blew up from the high plateau during the Dust Bowl. And of course, it had wood shingles on it, so that dust would blow in on the shingles and settle down on the attic. And I know people don't realize that 10 years of wind and dust, how that accumulates. 1935 was the year I was born. That was the most dustiest year of the 10 years of the Dust Bowl. It got so dark the chickens would go to roost. Timothy Egan's book, Worst Hard Times, should read that. And then when you see a spring like we got with no water, you start thinking about things like that. But grasshoppers then came in, and there was no forage. It was just several times, and the farms around here was water starved. The government started digging wells. There's a well over by Freeman that I only know as the government well, that I recall riding as a lad in a wagon pulled by a team of horses with 3 barrels in it so we could go to the government well and get potable water. Anyhow, when you don't have potable water, that is an issue. And you stop and think about the storms that come through this nation and washes everything away, including the power. You start thinking about what are those people gonna drink? So FEMA needs to be on the ball when those type of things happen. Now, let's go back to dismantling the building. We went out in '99 and dismantled it. I put it on farm wagons. I could get it before they did. And I've always had pride in that fact that basic arithmetic was what really helped me out in my industry. Somebody would say something, I could calculate that in my mind, and I knew how many board feet or how many this or that, and it was just a good learning experience for me. Now, when it comes to English, well, anyhow, we better not talk about that.
Where did you find the school mark?
Well,
The world school.
the rural schools, most of those, my first 3 teachers were first-year teachers out of Orangeburg. And my 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teacher was Dorothy Dahm out of Peculiar. Bill Dahm had 2 daughters, Louise and Dorothy. Louise taught at the Wolf School District, and Dorothy taught at this. Bill would bring those girls in his old Dodge wooden wheel spoke car, and he would build a fire in the stove, and then he'd chuckle over to Wolf School and build a fire for Louise in her school. So that family grew for 4 years, and then when I graduated, she moved on to another school, and I don't know where she moved to, but she was here for the dedication of the building. I hadn't seen her for decades, but it was good to see her. We had 5 teachers here for the dedication that were still alive. And only one of them is still alive today, and that is Ruth Smith, and she lives over at Foxcroft, and I think Ruth is 92 years old.
Or more. Yeah, I think about that. She's actually 95, I think. She'll be, yeah, she's 95.
Yeah.
I built the fire, and the teacher finally came. She was madder than heck. She said, "Who built that fire?" "He did." They all ratted me out, and she just whipped the hell out of me. But anyway, that's neither here nor there, but it brings back old memories when I see that. And you are?
I'm Bill Irwin, retired Lee Summit police officer, live in Lee Summit, but on the Cass County side. So I'm kind of a northerner in the way of being a Cass County resident. But love this history, love the heritage that goes on here. Thank you for giving this to me, putting it together.
Robert Gaines, born in Raymore, moved to Freeman, grew up there, moved to Georgia for like 9 months, moved back to Freeman, moved to Grandview for a little under a year, moved back to Freeman, moved to Michigan for a little under a year, moved back to Freeman. Somewhere in between there's been Belton again, Raymore again, little stint in Lee Summit, but I always end up right around Harrisonville, Peculiar, Freeman. This is home base, and I can't get away from it.
I'm Jackie. I've only been in Missouri for 3 weeks.
For lunch when I was a 4th grader. And of course, my lunch bucket was a syrup can. I probably would have had a last night's biscuit with an early morning sausage patty in it that was good and cold by the time I was ready to eat it. Or it would have been an egg inside that biscuit. I might have had a half-pint fruit jar with tomatoes in it, or peaches, and possibly apples. that had been stewed. And I always wanted a cookie, and I like cookies yet today because they stick together. You can usually get two of them. And that was probably our lunch. We would have about 30 minutes on the outside at the noon hour, and then, of course, in the morning.
Were the ones who got all of the rock for the actual monument. They used 7 dump loads of native fieldstone from the Henry Washington Younger farm. Younger might sound like a familiar name to you guys if you know your Jesse James history. And their farm was located on the south side of Orient Cemetery Road near the elementary school. The chimney is fully functional. It stands 22 feet high. John Foster supervised the construction and hand-laid each of the bricks in the Memorial Reconciliation Plaza. All grading and concrete work, including pad, sidewalk, and parking area, was donated by Cass County through the commissioners. The monument sign, which is this wood sign that you saw as you drove up, it is from an eastern red cedar from the 700 block of East Pearl in Harrisonville that had been struck by lightning but was not scorched. John took the tree to a sawyer in Sibley, Missouri, who sawed it into three sections, each 4 inches thick, 14 inches wide, and 12 feet 4 inches long. So then he took the sections to Bennett Signs in Harrisonville, which is just down off of 7 Highway heading towards Clinton, to have the lettering routed and stained for the Burnt District Monument sign. An employee there shared with Foster that Burns Elliott told the story of how several cedars about 100 years old came to be planted. Elliott, an African-American resident of Harrisonville, said that he, his father, and grandfather had planted cedars on North Main near the present-day Hope Haven on Chestnut and along Pearl, and when they were doing street work for the city in 1908. This wood was probably from one of those cedars. So, yeah. How many of you are familiar with order number 11? Okay, have you heard the exact text of order number 11? Okay, I kind of wanted to read that to give the background of why this is called, why we have the Burnt District Monument, and why Cass County is part of the Burnt District. So, General Order number 11 was issued on August 25th, 1863, and it states, all persons living in Jackson, Cass, and Bates County, Missouri, and in that part of Vernon, included in this district, except those living within 1 mile of the limits of Independence, Hickman Mills, Pleasant Hill, and Harrisonville, and except those in part of Caw Township, Jackson County, north of Brush Creek, and west of Big Blue, are hereby ordered to remove from their present places of residence within 15 dates from the date hereof. Those who within that time establish their loyalty to the satisfaction of the commanding officer of the military station near their present place of residence will receive from him a certificate stating the fact of their loyalty and the names of witnesses by whom it can be shown. All who receive such certificates will be permitted to remove to any military station in this district or to any part of the state of Kansas, except the counties of the eastern border of the state. All others shall remove out of the district. Officers commanding companies and detachments serving in the counties named will see that this paragraph is promptly obeyed. All grain and hay in the field or under shelter in the district from which inhabitants are required to remove within reach of military stations after the 9th day of September will be taken to such stations and turned over to the proper officers there, and report of the amount so turned over made to district headquarters, specifying the names of all loyal owners and amount of such product taken from them. Sounds like they have a drone heading off. Everybody wave at the drone. Hi! Okay. All grain and hay found in such district after the 9th day of September next, not convenient to such stations, will be destroyed. The provisions of General Order Number 10 from these headquarters will be at once vigorously executed by officers commanding in the parts of the district and at the station not subject to the operations of paragraph 1 of this order, and especially the towns of Independence, Westport, and Kansas City. Paragraph 3, General Order Number 10 is revoked as to all who have borne arms against the government in the district since the 20th day of August, 1863, by order of Brigadier General Ewing. So that is what Cass County residents found out about, and not real quickly. They didn't have Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. They had their local newspapers.
But welcome to your first stop. This is the Courtyard of Honor, one of the very few that exists in the United States that recognizes all the wars. 166 names are on either the World War I or on down to the Spanish-American War. 166 names. They give their life for military service. The slogan is, if you know a veteran, he gave some, but these veterans gave all. So, hey, it's an honor to be standing in their presence. But let me talk first about the Doughboy. The Doughboy was erected in 1929. It was the county commissioners got permission from both the U.S. Congress allowed $1,000 for any monument, any county monument to be built. They put up $2,000 and this memorial was erected. They let bids out and the bid went to a gentleman in Butler. The Doughboy, as you look at it, it was unveiled, in 1929 they did that. This was constructed in 60 days. And the Doughboy was constructed in New Hampshire. It was brought here by train, pulled up the hill, and was erected. As I look up at him into the sky, I think, man, he's a giant. You know, he's 6 foot tall. He's just 6 foot tall, but he looks like a giant to me when I look up. It was unveiled in 60 days on Armistice Day, November 11th, 1929, which is now Memorial Day just coming up. 8,000 people were in the square to watch the unveiling. I don't think there's been 8,000 people on the square since then, but 8,000 people showed up here to unveil when the dedication was unveiled. The county court paid for it with $1,000 from the U.S. government. So $2,000 from the county, $1,000 to the county court, but the gentleman in Butler only charged $2,500. So somebody's got to be looking for that extra $500. And who knows where it went? Somewhere. The granite is all from New Hampshire. Like I said, if you look at the Doughboy, and I'll try to move on a little quick, he is exactly like a soldier going into war. If you look, he has a rifle on one side, he has the hand armament on the other side, he has a canteen, he has a belt of ammunition, he has a backpack, probably carrying a letter from either his wife or his mother or somebody, and it's exactly like a Doughboy would be going into war. That's one of the neat things about it. Oh, a gas mask, because in World War I was our first experience with gas, and so he actually has a gas mask. Horses were used then too, and if you go to any museum, you'll see horses actually had gas masks. So that it's copyrighted right down to an original soldier. These benches behind here might have been where the extra money went, because there are 3 long benches along here that have the emblems of the times, the emblems of the American Legion, the U.S. emblem, and there's a no, and I can't read fast enough to know where they are. Okay, in World War I, war was declared in April of 1917 by the United States. They didn't have an army then. So all of a sudden in May, now next month, the draft was in order. And during that draft, all men 21 to 39 years old that didn't have an excuse were to show up to be drafted. At that time, At that time, there was 53 men from Cass County, Harrisonville, that showed up right out here. A colonel stood right there, swore them in. They marched down the street to the railroad, and to the old railroad depot, which is Shelton's, and they got on that train and went to Kansas to a camp which was really quickly erected south of Fort Riley. It wasn't Fort Riley, but it was south of Fort Riley. Each man on this has their own story. There are 116,000 plus casualties in World War I. 53 in combat and 63 in non-combat. 63,000. 53 in combat, 63,000. And their names are there, and each one of them has a story. Let's move on down to World War II, please. Anyhow, in this book that's available at the Historical Society, this book lists all the casualties of World War I and actually tells how they died, what they were doing, whether it was disease or what else. Each man has a story. They go to Foster, don't lose that. Then the other things, here in the World War II, I got to go back to my notes. World War II, there's 90 Cass County veterans casualties, 90. The first monument to World War II veterans is in Memorial Stadium, behind the concession stand. There's a big memorial there that was the first one that they did for World War II. Names you see here. The war had 407,000 casualties. 90 Cass Countians, and each one again has a story. To explain what this is all about, that the dead shall not have died in vain. Okay, it was placed here by the American Legion, the 2 VFW posts, and the Honor Guard. So it is to just remember the 5 branches of the military service that all give some and some give all. The Korean War, here 36,000 Americans give their lives there. We were very fortunate, not fortunate. In Cass County, we only had 9 give their lives. Of these 9, they're kind of interesting. 2 of them were pilots that served in World War II, re-enlisted to serve in the Korean War, and died as pilots in that. 5 were killed in combat, and one of these books tells you about that. Anyhow, here, I'll give you the books. Give them back to Foster. Okay. Anyhow, 5 were in combat. 1 died in prison as a captive soldier, and another one died of polio. In the 50s, polio was everywhere, and one of these guys died of polio. Next is the Vietnam War. 5 Cass Countians died in that. And when we brought the wall 5 years ago or 4 years ago to town, we were able to find 3 of those families, and they came and we honored them when that wall came to town. But of the 5 that's here, of the 58,000 plus, remember the wall? 58,000 names on it. Pay the supreme price of sacrifice. Of our 5, 3 died in combat, 1 died in a helicopter crash, and one walking along a mine died in a roadside mine. So of those 5 people, various deaths, not all by combat, all by different things. When people think of Vietnam, I think of why. Because, you know, so many people were given, and I'll tell you the truth, the Vietnam veteran was serving his country, but really in the back of his mind had a question of why. And that why, it still eats a lot of people up, just as Agent Orange is eating him up. They have nightmares at night about the why, and it's really something to see. I go back to one other thing. I've never seen a community work so hard together as they did bringing the Vietnam Wall to this town. I helped a lot in that, and I was never told no. No one told me no. I don't want to help. I don't want to do that. Things were given, and it was just remarkable how the town came together. And as a Vietnam veteran, sort of made you feel the town is thanking you finally. They're not spitting on you or throwing things at you. They're thanking you. And so that bringing that wall to town actually meant a lot to me. The next one down is the 2 that have died in either the Afghanistan or the Beirut. The Beirut, Lebanon soldier here died when the barracks was attacked. The Marine barracks, 28 I think were attacked when the missiles hit the Marine barracks. We lost 1, this gentleman here. The next one is Jacob Carter, and his dad used to work for the city, or I believe that's correct, used to work for the city and anyhow, Jacob died walking along, and here came a Afghanistan person up towards him, suicide bomber, and that's how Jacob died. In that, Kenny, sad, really, because neither one of them saw action or anything. They were killed, and go down as part of the people that were killed. Last but not least is the Spanish-American War. Of the Spanish-American War, the United States has 2,061 casualties. These men of Cass County, hard to tell who died in combat and who didn't. But I can tell you the only Medal of Honor winner in these 166 names is the gentleman on top, Sterling Gott. And Sterling Gott was leading his platoon, chasing whoever we were fighting at that time. He was chasing them, and they blew up the bridge to cross a river. How's he going to keep chasing him? A lot of his men, according to history, could not swim. I don't know, they didn't swim. So he took a rope in his mouth, swam across this river, Pamanjala, I can't remember the name of the river, I've looked it up. But anyhow, Sterling Galt swam across the river with a rope in his mouth, tied it to a tree, and then Simone boys pulled him across. They went on the rope to get across the river to chase the other guys. Now, of these, hard to tell who died in combat and who died of another disease at that time, malaria. And back that far, we can research it, and it's in the book, but we don't know for sure how many died of malaria and how many actually were in combat. The one that I think is Sterling Galt is the one that's really memorialized because he is our only Medal of Honor winner. Okay, I at this time would like to have you, are there any questions or anything that I probably don't know about?
So, you served in the Vietnam War. Did you happen to know any of the boys that passed?
No. Of these? No, I didn't know these. But I had 5 fraternity brothers die. See what happened back in the 60s? If you flunked out of college, whoa, I was a draft dodger like you couldn't believe. I was. I jump in school, jump out of school. I taught 2 years. I went here. I got married. Thought I had it beat. All of a sudden, whoop! It comes. We had a choice: Canada or go. We're so family oriented. Go. I'll take my chances. I was very fortunate. I was in the 101st Airborne. I was in the 4th Army Band in San Antonio, Texas. I'm no hero. I was in the 101st Band in Vietnam. I'm no hero. But let me tell you, I have a big mouth. And I got in real trouble because I was really off about being in Vietnam. So all of a sudden we're playing this tune and we can't get through it. It was a good band. And we keep going, and the sergeant, E8, the sergeant threw his baton down and said, "You guys are the most worthless things. No one, you don't deserve to be here. I don't know what's wrong with you." 2 weeks in country, I raised my hand. I said, "You're directing it wrong. You have never heard anything so quiet. You have never heard." He looked at me and he says, "I suppose you think you can do better." And I said, "My God, I'd hope so." He said, "It's yours." I thought, oh, my mouth gets me in trouble more and more. After rehearsal, he said, "Finish rehearsal. You think you're so damn good?" I did. Okay, and he said, "Come to my office." I know he was going to say, "Turn in your horn. Here's your rifle. Go to wherever boondocks you wanted. Somebody will pick you up." He made me the NCOIC of the band, non-commissioned officer in charge. And so the rest of the time I was there. The only problem with that was I was an E4 at the time, and I'm telling E7s and E8s, "You're out of tune. Try it here." To it. Guess who assigned the duty? The E7s and the E8. So I really got some plush duties after directing the band. But I was so fortunate to do that, and it was such an honor. Bob Hope's show for 3 months, can't beat that. And one of the gold diggers I just found out lives in Raytown. She ran a dance studio, and they were talking about that. Thank you for being here. Hope you enjoyed the tour. Thank you.